Our next speaker is Dr. Aysha Akhtar. Dr. Akhtar is a board-certified neurologist and public health specialist. She's the author of the book, Animals and Public Health, Why Treating Animals Better is Critical to Human Welfare. Dr. Akhtar is the Deputy Director of the Army Traumatic Brain Injury Program and a Fellow of the Oxford Center for Animal Ethics. Welcome.
So let's start with a quick question. Do we as a society benefit from treating animals? Thank you. Do we as a society benefit from treating animals with basic kindness? Now, of course, to all of us in this room, this is a very, very easy question to answer. But for the majority of people in the world, it's actually a very difficult question. And I'm sure you guys know this. Most people actually think that we are in some sort of competition with animals, right? That we can either use our resources and our time and our energy to protect humans from harm or protect animals. In other words, most people have come to believe that it's us or the animals. But over the course of my career in medicine and public health, I've learned that we are not in competition with animals. It's quite the opposite. In fact, I've learned that our fates are shared with those of animals. What I've learned actually is this. It's not us or them, it's us and them. When we save animals, we save ourselves. And when we hurt animals, we hurt ourselves too. In fact, many of our most urgent public health threats are connected with the ways we treat animals. So you guys remember back in 2014 when Ebola raged across Western Africa? That was a scary time. Not only was it horrific for the people who it was affecting in Africa, but for the first time in a long time, we were scared that Ebola was going to come here. And thankfully, that epidemic actually subsided. It's gone. But we are far from free from Ebola. It is a virus that is rapidly mutating. In fact, there's another outbreak in Africa, and we'll probably see yet another outbreak. Now, we normally catch Ebola when we hunt, butcher, and eat wild animals from the African bush. So like wild pigs, wild monkeys, and bats. And while the bushmeat trade has existed for a very long time, it's been drastically ramped up in recent years. As we clear-cut the forests and the savanna for the logging trade and to create new pig farms, and as we shrink the natural habitat of wild animals, we make exposure to these animals easier, and the viruses that they carry, easier than ever before. So as we delve deeper and deeper into the jungles and the forests to catch animals for this trade, we risk exposure to rarely encountered animals who may carry viruses that are entirely new to the human population. So HIV is one example. Before 1980, no one had heard of HIV. But we now suspect that the first person caught HIV through the bushmeat trade, specifically through chimpanzees. This bushmeat trade is, though, just a very tiny little part of the larger wildlife trade. In this trade, animals are caught from the wild or bred in captivity. They are then sold for use as exotic pets, as meat, as exotic medicines, for entertainment, and for experimentation. And as, of course, we all know, they're also used for their fur, their skins, and their feathers that are then used to decorate our coats, our handbags, and our shoes. Any animal is up for this trade. Bats, pigs, cats, foxes, snakes, rats, you name it. If there is an animal out there, she's fair game for the wildlife trade. And as you can imagine, these animals suffer tremendously as they are passed from dealer to dealer, shipped out overseas, or killed on site in profoundly painful ways. Now imagine you're one of these animals. You're just going about your business. Maybe you filled your belly on some fruit and you're happily and contently lazing in the sun, when suddenly you are ripped from your home, ripped from your family and everything you know, with no understanding of what's happening to you. Now you would be absolutely terrified and distressed, and that would cause your immune system to go down. And then you would have a very hard time fighting off new infections. And this is what happens to animals in the trade. The wildlife trade creates and brings together a lot of different and very sick animals. Ideal conditions for pathogens to pass from animal to animal and ultimately to humans. The unfortunate reality is that there are very few laws protecting animals in the wildlife trade. And where these laws exist, they are so pitiful and rarely enforced that they provide no deterrent for traders. And keep in mind, I'm talking about the legal wildlife trade. I'm not talking about the illegal trade. We all know about the illegal trade. That's what the media will report about. But they never talk about the legal trade, which is much more widespread and much more damaging. When traders catch animals and they ship them overseas, they will do everything to save every nickel and dime that they have. And to reduce shipping costs, they will pack animals, jam-pack animals into flimsy crates or sometimes even cardboard, where the animals will sometimes crush each other to death or they smother to death. These animals are constantly exposed to extreme heat, extreme cold, they're dehydrated, they're starved, they're in filthy conditions. Diseases are the norm for these animals. This is their day-to-day reality. And the conditions are so bad that a significant number of animals will die before they ever reach their final destinations. About a half of birds and almost 3/4 of all reptiles will die during transportation alone. Now, what we do to animals will come back and haunt us because we are exposing ourselves to infectious diseases by creating sick animals. And it's not just the transportation, it's not just the catching and the transportation of animals, it's even the way we kill animals that can expose us to diseases. You guys know how we kill animals in the trade. These animals are gassed, they're poisoned, they're electrocuted, they're stomped on, they're bludgeoned, they're disemboweled, they're sometimes skinned alive. The thing is, the messier our method of killing animals, the more routes by which a virus can infect the person who's doing the killing. So for example, bushmeat hunters will go out and bludgeon a monkey out after they've caught a monkey. And as they're bludgeoning, and I'm sorry this is so descriptive, but it's just to give you an idea of how we can catch these infections. There's fluids flying through the air, right? You think, if any of those fluids, those bodily fluids from the monkey, gets into your nose, your eyes, down your throat, or onto a cut on your skin, or if the monkey has a virus that can be airborne, that can transport through the respiratory route, you're going to catch that virus. And then you're going to take it back to your family and the other people in your town, and then it's going to spread. This is how we caught SARS, severe acute respiratory syndrome. So here's what happened. In 2003, SARS emerged for the first time in the Guangdong province in China. It emerged in what's called open markets, where animals are sold in these outdoor stalls. And it spread so quickly within that time that within a few months, SARS killed 1,000 people. So the Chinese Public Health Authority tracked down SARS, and they found it in these animals called civets. They're like a mixture between raccoons and cats. And when the Chinese Public Authority found SARS virus in the civet cats, their response was to kill thousands of these animals by poisoning them, electrocuting them, and drowning them in disinfectants. While later research showed us that SARS likely didn't originate in the civets, but probably emerged from fruit bats. Fruit bats are also caught for the wildlife trade, and they are sold for their meat. Civets are caught and sold for their musk-producing glands. So what we suspect is that at some point in the wildlife trade, fruit bats who were miserable and distressed and were carrying the SARS virus were brought into contact with civets who were also miserable and distressed, and the virus passed from the fruit bats to the civets and then on to humans. And it spread so quickly, that it was a major public health concern. Since in the past few decades, we've had a dramatic rise in the number of emerging infectious diseases. And most of them are coming from animals. About 3 new viruses are emerging each year. So we have the Zika virus, the Lyme virus, the virus, HIV, SARS, Ebola, swine flu, bird flu. Some of these you've never even heard of because they're happening over there. But we have been tremendously lucky so far. And if you think we here in the US are safe from those viruses that are happening over there, well, let me dispel that myth. So in 2014, our country was really terrified when that Ebola epidemic was happening in Africa. For the first time, our public health authority mounted a national Ebola response. And I'm a lieutenant commander in the public health service, and during that time, I was deployed to help screen all passengers arriving into the US airports from West Africa. So for months, we screened all passengers coming from Western Africa for Ebola. But what about the more than 1 million animals who enter US ports each year? With only about 150 inspection officers nationwide, less than 1/4 of all wildlife shipments get inspected, and out of those, most of them get a rudimentary glance. So an animal carrying a deadly disease can easily slip into the US. And this is how we got monkeypox. African Gambian rats were shipped into the US several years back to be used as pets. And they were housed in pet stores, and in that pet stores, they were carrying monkeypox, unbeknownst to the traders. And in these pet stores, the African Gambian rats passed the monkeypox on to other animals, who were then bought as pets, and then they passed it on to humans. And this caused an outbreak, the only outbreak of monkeypox we've ever had in the US. Because of the wildlife trade, we have a gaping gap in our public health armor. And no one, anywhere, is safe from a deadly pathogen. Every human life is now impacted by the way we treat animals. And I know we have been lucky. We have been so lucky that each time an epidemic or an outbreak flares up, it ends up getting contained. But it's only a matter of time before a virus emerges that will quickly spread around the globe and cause a devastating pandemic. And when that happens, all the models and all the fashion shows won't be walking down the runways wearing fur, but instead will be wearing this. Thank you very much. So obviously we have time for questions. So are there any questions? Yeah. Yeah, so the question is, how can we as citizens change and get these issues out there? One of the things is our public health authorities aren't really taking the wildlife trade seriously, not nearly seriously enough. Every once in a while we hear something coming out from the CDC in this country, and I don't know about elsewhere, about, oh, people should not be handling turtles, you know, your kids shouldn't handle turtles because of salmonella, things like that. But the public health agencies really don't address the fundamental problem, which is really how we want to have our relationships with animals, how we treat animals, and whether or not we should continue with having a wildlife trade at all. They never really address that. And so there are times when the public health agencies will open up discussions to the public for public commentary on different issues. And the only way to know about that is going to their website, like going to the CDC's website or the Food and Drug Administration's website. And when you see that, that's the time to definitely voice your opinion about the wildlife trade. The other thing that each of us can do is that we can, whenever a media outlet writes about the illegal wildlife trade, we need to write back to the media and demand that they also start paying attention to the legal wildlife trade as well. Just because something is legal doesn't mean it's right. It doesn't mean that it's good for us or good for the animals, obviously. But the media just does not report on the legal wildlife trade, and we need to demand that they start doing that. Yeah?
How significant is the difference between animal agriculture and wildlife trade in regards to transmission? Was it H5N1 all chicken, poultry?
Yeah. So that's so the question is how the difference between factory farms or animal agriculture and the wildlife trade in transmitting infections. It's going to be, we're going to get the next pandemic either through the wildlife trade or through factory farming. And you can mark my words on that. That's where the next pandemic is going to come. It's just a matter of which one's going to beat it, the other one first. Swine flu is rapidly mutating. Bird flu and swine flu are rapidly mutating in factory farms because of the crowded conditions and because these animals are so miserable. Same thing, their immune systems are down, so they're catching the virus from other animals and they're passing it on. There's a lot of similarities between the factory farm and the wildlife trade in that respect. Yes?
What's the title of your book again?
Oh, the book I wrote is Animals in Public Health. And why treating animals is better is critical to human welfare. I will tell you that's more of an academic book, and it's pretty pricey. And I don't mean to say not to buy it, but I do have another book coming out, which is going to be a trade book, and it's coming out in May, and it's the title's going to be Our Symphony with Animals, and subtitles on health, empathy, and our shared destinies. And that's going to really take a look at our fundamental relationship with animals, our empathy for animals, or lack of empathy for animals, and how it affects their well-being, the good, the bad, and the ugly and the beautiful. So that book won't necessarily address all these infectious disease risks, but it's going to address our relationship with animals from a different angle. And that's going to be much more affordable, I guarantee.
Right.
Yes?
Regarding the illegal wildlife trade, ramifications as far as overseeing it, airline companies that actually have any type of relationship with this trade, how are they allowed to get away if it's illegal?
Are you talking about the illegal wildlife trade? Well, the airlines, as far as how the animals are being transported in the illegal wildlife trade, so here's the thing. The problem is, as long as we have the legal wildlife trade, and there have been a lot of studies that have shown this, as long as we have the legal wildlife trade, it makes it much easier for the illegal trade to exist. And because if you're shipping animals around the globe, and that's legally done, it's really much harder to capture the parts that are illegal. Remember, inspection officers are so few, just in this country alone. They barely can check what the inspections are. It's easy to slip in illegally sourced or endangered species and a protected species, depending on their size, of course, in with the so-called legally animals that are legally traded. The other thing is that the illegal trade also can be a source, or the legal trade, I'm sorry, can be a way of breeding the animals in captivity. It's a way of hiding the breeding of illegally traded animals in captivity within the larger system, if that makes sense. So how other than being shipped into the same crates or the same shipment with animals that are legally shipped, that's one route. Other routes are people are just smuggling animals. There have been stories of people smuggling animals into toilet paper rods, like smuggling birds and lizards and small reptiles into toilet paper holders, into their backpacks, coming across the country. You can name it, into all kinds of ways that people are finding ways to ship animals. And what they do is that the illegal traders will drug these animals so that they're not making any noise, will bind them together, or other ways tie them to restrict their movement so that it's harder to catch. But the legal trade definitely makes it harder. It's easier to hide the illegal trade within the larger legal trade. Oh, yeah.
Just a point, just to add on.
Yeah.
I used to do HIV research, but anyway, of course, the other side is that they're enjoying, got to figure out a cure for all the humans who've been infected, so then we take the virus and we infect it into animals.
Yep.
And start, I'm just adding on to that. I mean, just,
That's your comment is about, so it's bad enough that we treat these animals so poorly that we catch infections from them. And then we go and take other animals, we put them in the laboratories, and then we purposely give them these diseases to find cures. Cures for diseases that we could have prevented in the first place. You're absolutely right. This is one of the things I also talk a lot about. Yes?
Well, there's Lyme disease. I saw a program on TV, I don't know if it's over or not, Plum Island, they're doing experiments on animals giving diseases and stuff like that. So
Yeah, for Lyme disease, people are doing experiments on animals for everything. You can think of anything, and people are doing that experiment. Lyme disease is an interesting thing, and research indicates that Lyme disease is really on the rise, right? My husband actually had Lyme disease, and we caught it, but he was going through a period where he had these high fevers, really high fevers, and he would say that his joints felt like there was ground glass in them. And we didn't catch it until one day I noticed, it was just a few days in, but I noticed that he had the very, very indicative bullseye rash on his shoulder that really indicates Lyme disease. Most people don't get that rash, but we were lucky we saw that, so we were able to get it treated. But Lyme disease is a miserable disease. If not treated in time, it can cause long-term neurological and inflammatory problems. And research suggests that Lyme disease is increasing because of our increasing encroachment into the wild habitats into the US, and we are fragmenting our forests. And what that is doing is fragmenting the forest is actually making it easier. It's promoting the life cycle of these mice called white-footed mice, who are very strong carriers of the Lyme disease. So then mosquitoes can catch it from the mice as well, and people, it's not really so much that deer are catching the virus and carriers of the virus, but that the virus is being carried by these white-footed mice. And it's the fragmentation of our forest that is directly responsible for the increase in Lyme disease. Yes?
Don't you think that educating people about veganism and organic green living will prevent these pandemic transmissions?
Educating people about green living, and if the world could go vegan, we would definitely dramatically reduce our risk of a pandemic coming from a factory farm, obviously. unless we cut out wildlife trade as well, we're still not going to completely, bring that risk down to zero. So it's not, it takes individual personal choices, definitely, but it also takes widespread policy choices as well. Yes?
One of my fellow activists said this one time while we were protesting Canada Goose, that there's this huge risk that by wiping out all these coyotes for this fur, that it's going to allow for overpopulations of their prey, like small mice and rodents and other things. And then we're going to increase the risk of catching like these kind of bizarre, unheard of.
Yeah, so wiping out like coyotes, wild coyotes, in order to use their fur will cause repercussions. We know this. It causes, we muck things up, Anything we do, we pretty much are doing something in the wrong way. We go and muck things up, and nature has a way of keeping things in balance. But then we think we're so smart, and we go and we decide we want to control this animal population, or we want to use this species for their fur, or whatever. And we totally disentangle. I mean, we create a worse tangle in the natural way of things. And what that happens is that some animals, that balance is gone, and some animals may flourish who are carriers of diseases that will come back and impact us. So that's what we're seeing with Lyme disease, and we're going to see that with other types of diseases. Who knows, that could be what's causing the Zika virus, what caused the emergence of Zika virus. We just haven't tracked it down. We won't track down the majority of these viruses. It's impossible. But what we do know is that most animals are carriers of a number of viruses that we have never even seen yet. And the more and more we encroach upon the wild animals, the more likely we're going to catch these viruses, and it's going to cause havoc amongst us. Yes?
I believe it has a coding group. It's not just about so it's frankly, that's just not just about
Yeah. Well, some people, the thing is, some people think of veganism as more of a dietary thing for their health. And really what we need to do, and that's, as far as I'm concerned, if people reduce the number of animals they eat for whatever reason, that's always good. I won't say no to that. But we're not going to fundamentally change things unless we fundamentally change how we want to be with animals. And so if people become vegan, because at least in part out of concern for animals, then that will have larger repercussions in a good way. Any other questions? Okay, thanks everyone.